Hello and welcome to GitKon Day 3. I'm your host, Jonathan Silva, and I'm delighted to have you here. Let's catch you up on everything that's been happening. GitKon got off to a red-hot start with our opening keynote, Dharmesh Shah, founder and CTO of HubSpot, sharing his thoughts on the future of software. Then we had a very special and meaningful session on mental health in the workplace with award-winning actor and mental health advocate, Astin. Also day 1, Justin Roberts revealed 2 powerful new GitKraken innovations, Focus View and Cloud Patches, while day 2 featured another fantastic keynote session with Docker CTO Justin Cormack speaking on the new age of developer experience. In total, we had 18 sessions and nearly 6 hours of high-impact sessions designed to help developers and teams be more productive and more collaborative. And we're not slowing down today. We are streaming live on YouTube, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Check GitKon.com at any time for the full schedule and to see all of our amazing speakers. And finally, all of our content will be made available on demand after the event ends. Now, let's kick off our day 3 with our first speaker, Ellie Schleifer. Ellie is founder and CEO of Trunk.io with a mission to supercharge developer experience. Prior to starting Trunk, Ellie ran the autonomy systems team at Uber's Advanced Technology Group. In 2014, he sold his startup director to Google. Ellie's here to talk about tech debt and why engineers are learning the wrong lessons around past mistakes. Let's learn why not all tech debt is created equal.
Hello, my name is Ellie Schleifer. I am co-CEO and one of the founders at Trunk.io, where we build a developer experience toolkit to accelerate engineering. I've been a practicing engineer for the last 20 years. In that time, I've created myself a treasure trove of tech debt. And this talk, we're going to reflect on the fact that not all tech debt is created equal. In my role at Trunk, I've had the opportunity to talk with hundreds of different engineering organizations. And it's been fascinating to see how different lessons have been learned. We'll often see engineers moving from big tech companies and trying to bring big tech practices down to smaller companies. And often the lessons that have been learned at big tech are not applicable to smaller tech or even to mid-sized tech. In this talk, we're going to reflect on the type of tech debt that smaller mid-sized companies or even large companies should be taking on and how to reflect on when is the right time to pay down that tech debt. I'd like to start by reflecting on the idea of the monolith. The explosion of microservices in engineering practice would seem to indicate that monoliths are a thing to 100% avoid. We often hear from the highly successful, notable companies how in year 10 of operation they are taking on a massive project to break apart their Ruby monolith or whatever technology they were built on. And I've seen a lot of smaller engineering organizations earlier in their life cycles decide to avoid this 10-year down the road problem by breaking every piece of code into a microservice. I think this is a case where a monolith actually is beneficial earlier in the development cycle of a service, or at least worth considering on balance, because there are virtues to building everything inside a single box. Deployment is simpler, versioning is simple, everything ships at once, and if you need to scale, you can deploy more instances of the monolith, assuming a reasonable sharding solution has been put in place. The meta lesson here is not that a monolith is good or bad, but just because a monolith will always require decomposition, just because a monolith is inherently a form of tech debt, doesn't mean that you should avoid starting with a monolith. It doesn't mean that all tech debt is to be avoided. Multi-billion-dollar companies were built on top of giant monoliths, and they were quite successful with that giant monolith in place. Consider that when we're hearing about a giant company breaking apart their 10-year-old monolith, that's a story of success. That's a story about a company that was able to scale to massive value to their customers. This resonates with a common argument in engineering to avoid premature optimization. Certain microservice solutions absolutely are premature optimizations for scaled problems that startups dream about having. As we build into this microservice, microrepo world, we're at great risk of creating tremendous amounts of tech debt that are not worth taking on. The next piece of technical debt I want to explore is around technical documentation. Now, this comes in multiple flavors. We have comments inside our source code, and we also have technical specs that are written by engineers before and during execution of a project. Now, at the end of the day, when it comes to software programs, the source code is the truth. Everything else is an approximation of that truth. And I've seen organizations spend an inordinate amount of time writing very lengthy specifications before execution and during development that at the end of the day are not particularly worth the time spent on it. This is a space where I'd say technical debt is great to accrue. Don't worry about updating your specs all the time. Where you do need to be on top of things is when it comes to documentation for your consumers. So if you're creating an API, make sure that API is well documented and up to date. If you're creating documentation inside your website for your customers, make sure that's accurate. But when it comes to documenting your internal systems, your architectural diagrams, your lengthy technical specifications, a lot of that time spent is not worth it. I would say take on that technical debt. Technical documentation often gets out of sync from the source code. Source code is going to evolve, and it's going to be very hard to keep your technical documentation up to speed with what's actually happening in the code base. So only generate your documentation on demand for when you need it. I would argue that every line of code is essentially some form of tech debt. Languages fall out of favor. The trendy web framework of the moment will seem very stale to your engineers in a couple of years' time. But we have to remember that at the end of the day, your customers in general do not care what technology your product is written in. They do not care what microservice architecture you use or toolkit you're building on top of. They care that the product works, that it's reliable, and that you can continue to innovate to make it better. Now, that last piece will often be the driving force behind paying down your tech debt. We can look at tech debt like we would traditional financial debt. Businesses use debt to create leverage, to move with greater speed than their in-hand resources would otherwise allow. We as engineers take on tech debt in similar vein. We seek to build prototypes quickly that we know will not scale well, that will not scale to 1 billion users, but are quicker to build this way. And that is a case where we're taking on tech debt in hopes of success. Now, as we all know, a dirty secret of the engineering world is that quick prototype code is often going to become shipping code because the product team wants to get it out the door really quickly. But again, these are cases of tech debt that we're going to take on and pay down when we need to. And that's something that we need to reflect on, the when we need to part. On the flip side, if we take on tech debt on a project that flops, we can write off that debt without ever paying it back. So when we're quickly prototyping, if something is not interesting or the project fails, we can just delete it and forget about ever paying down that tech debt. So in this way, we're basically using leverage and using rapid development to determine when we should actually make bigger and more expensive investments in scalability, in performance monitoring, in performance optimization. Now let's consider some tech debt that must be paid down. The most frequent case is dependent technologies that are being deprecated. Many organizations accrued massive Python tech debt and had to migrate their code bases to Python 3 from Python 2. This was tech debt that could no longer be deferred. Similarly, AWS and other cloud providers will often sunset old versions of services and require their customers to move to the latest version. This is again a piece of tech debt that must be paid down as soon as possible. And finally, our security tools are constantly screaming at us, for good reason, to upgrade the dependencies we've codified in our package.json, requirements.txt, or cargo toml files. These are all cases of tech debt that must be paid down ASAP. As we reflect on this type of tech debt, these are cases where we are using pieces of technology as they are readily available, and the industry technology has moved forward, and we need to pay that back down. The TLDR, I guess, on this topic for me is to think about these ideas when your engineers are pushing to rewrite your service stack in Rust, because everyone loves Rust, or migrate all your tests from Jest to Mocha, or vice versa. We need to pause and ask ourselves what benefits we're getting out of this work. What is motivating your engineers to want to do this work? Is it something they want to do because they're excited about this technology, or it's something they're excited to do because it will help the business? At the end of the day, engineers that are working at companies are working for a business. As a basic rubric, I would say that the most important tech debt to pay down are the spots in your engineering workflows that are significantly slowing down your engineers. And these are often asynchronous workflows. think about what happens when your engineer pushes code to GitHub or GitLab. Think about what happens in CI. Think about the flows that they have to go through as they're trying to deploy systems into the cloud. Into this category of work, I would place issues such as flaky tests, excessively slow build, deploy steps, brittle deployment scripts that can chew through an engineer's day. All of these are places where a tremendous amount of time is spent by the engineer fixing things up, and that time tends to be asynchronously attributed. So the engineer does some work, has to wait a while until that flaky test rears its head, go back in, hit the replay button, and try again. Any place where an engineer is expecting a computing system to work, but instead has to babysit it, that is a place of tech debt that really requires or is worth pursuing optimization for. That is tech debt you should burn down. So that's a pretty good place to start burning down your tech debt at your organization. And I think it's pretty easy to see why it's worthwhile. Any place where there's code executing over and over again that is problematic, all of your engineers are hitting that problem. Flaky tests affect all of your engineering organization. Having one engineer going to fix that up is going to basically pay massive dividends to the rest of your engineering organization. We so happen to build a bunch of tools at Trunk that facilitate burning down or investigating your tech debt. If you're looking to speed up your engineering workflows, please check out our tool set, and feel free to reach out to me and my team with any feedback. Thanks for watching. As with all advice, I'd say your mileage may vary. Happy to hear about all the hotspots of tech debt that I missed. Happy coding.
Hey everyone, Jeremy here from GitKraken, and I am beyond excited to introduce you to the forefront of developer innovation, GitKraken Labs. We're pioneering the way teams collaborate, pushing boundaries on how software teams code, create, and come together. From leveraging OpenAI for smarter commits to streamlining command line tasks and enhancing team communication, we're crafting the ultimate collaborative experience. Many of our GitKraken Labs capabilities are available for you to begin using today. But we're not just looking ahead, we want you on this journey. When you sign up, you'll stay updated on all the latest innovation, have your voice heard through feedback, and actively participate in the future of development. Our powerful suite of tools are designed to make sure no developer works in isolation. We're bridging the gap between developer experience, innovation, and collaboration. Become a part of the future. Sign up today at gitkraken.com/labs.
All right, technical debt. I once heard from a clever developer that technical debt is just the difference of opinion between two developers. So Eli, thank you so much for that informative scoop. Our next speaker is here to help you on your journey for the remarkable. You could even say your quest for the remarkable. Ben Schippers is co-founder and co-CEO of Happy Funcore, a product design firm specializing in creative software technology and user-friendly web and mobile applications. Ben is here with lessons for making products people actually want to use. Let's find out why building great software takes more than just code.
Well, first of all, thanks to GitKon for inviting me to speak. My name is Ben Schippers, and I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Happy Funcore. We do product design and engineering, mostly for consumer-facing applications, mobile and web. And this topic is sort of near and dear to my heart. Building software is so much more than code. It's something that I've spent the last 25 years working on. So I'm really excited just to talk about it. And I only have 10 or 15 minutes. So feel free to reach out. I'm sure my email will appear or hit me on Twitter. Would love to talk about it. So without further ado, let me just jump in. So when I started my career, I was focused on writing the best code and using the best tools at the time. And what I've realized over the last 20, 25 years is that building good software, like software that people really want to use, is so much more than just good code. And look, don't get me wrong. I mean, having good, solid, readable, scalable code is super, super important, especially for performance and managing costs. However, in my experience, 60 to 80, 70 to 85, like in that range of code that's written, good or bad, will service the single or individuals using the system, right? There's a huge tendency to over-engineer in the early days for a customer base that doesn't really currently exist, and look, might never. And by the way, that's okay. So like really and truly, software will be adopted if you're solving a problem for customers in a clear and concise way, not because you have the most beautiful code. And by the way, I love beautiful code, but this is just the reality of getting people to fall in love with your code, is you have to have sort of an interdisciplinary approach to making this all come together. And that's really what we're going to be talking about. So the realities of writing good software means you're going to write and rewrite code over and over again. And it'll become more and more tuned for how the customers are using the software, and generally not the other way around. So this goes for startups, by the way, and also basic enterprise work. And it also goes from, and we'll talk about this, 0 to 1 startups to legacy enterprise code. And again, we're going to like start digging into the specifics, but that's just like a really good approach for whether it's 0 to 1 or enterprise. Okay, so how do you build software that people actually want to use? And again, just to call this out and dig into a few specifics, I'm going to frame the majority of this as a 0 to 1 versus like a large existing code base. But as I stated, 15 seconds ago, all these concepts that we're going to talk about, they really apply. So let's break it into a few phases, and then we'll dig into specifics below. So the different phases of building software to get people to fall in love with your product. Ideation. That's strategy, right? Ideation strategy. Wireframing. User experience. UX. Early code, like a clickable prototype. And then from there, like I tend to go back into the ideation phase in this like broad phase. And then I go into adding some like basic design polish. And then from there, I'll add in like some backend code and a database. And then I'll have like my minimal viable product. And then I'll do feedback loops with customers, and I'll rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat. And as you rinse and repeat, you get tighter and tighter and tighter until you have a piece of software that people really want to use. And again, and I'm going to echo this throughout, the person or people who understand all aspects of these are in general considered, like a product architect. You can think of this person as a conductor, for instance, right? And it's really good to understand all aspects of these different phases to be able to build really good software. Here's just a helpful hint before we dig into some of the specifics. It's really important to focus in certain areas. And what I mean by that is focus means like really learning to say no inside of the ideation, inside of wireframing, inside of code, right? Like you want to learn to say no to features, right? So you can actually build what is critical, and then you can roll out more and more features. So you want to get to a minimal viable product as quickly as possible. And the only way to do that is to learn to say no. Okay, so the different phases of building software. What are you building and why? So let's start digging into some of the specifics. The first one is ideation. So this is generally the idea at a high level, like what are you trying to build and why? What is the smallest number of features you need to design and build to show some level of value to yourself and your end customers? And you, like, again, you really need to be a savage in this area of design, right? Like you need to kill features that aren't absolutely critical for value. And this is an art, and it takes time, and you'll get better and better and better at it as you do it more. Within all of these sections, at the very bottom, I call out tools, right? So you can just be aware that I'm going to talk about tools for each section. So within the ideation phase, the tools that I really like, Google Docs, Notion, Airtable, again, you can kind of use whatever you want. Tools are just there to hopefully help you manifest the idea. But that's what I like to use. Okay, ideation, done. Wireframing. I love wireframing. By the way, with wireframing, it can be as simple as drawing, right? Like on a napkin, all the way to using tools like Figma and Adobe. Like what you're really looking for here is organization around the super focused ideas from the ideation phase. This is all about organizing in a slightly more visual way. Now, based on your features, how is the customer going to navigate through the application, right? That's what you're trying to really answer here. This becomes navigation. Is this a mobile first experience? Can it work on the web? Does it need to support both? Once you understand the client interface, you can narrow down on how the components and pages are all going to work together. But this is where like the wireframing becomes really interesting. You go from the ideation idea, now we have the wireframes. Now we're visualizing those ideas on how it could potentially work. Super simple, right? Like I've found that it's easy to just stick to black and white and let yourself focus on features, layout, navigation, and like general usability. There's going to be a time and a place for design, but I tend to just like push that aside, leave it for the next phases, and just focus on usability and features and really locking it down and making sure it's tight. Okay, so tools. So napkin, right? Like there's nothing wrong with just like a napkin or a Post-it note. Figma, Balsamiq, Adobe Photoshop, Google Sheets, right? If you like slideshows and PowerPoints, etc. Again, for me personally, having done it and used all the tools, sometimes like I like to lean into an analog approach, right? So just like a pencil and a piece of paper, and then you can erase it. You have your flows, boom. Then you can just take it into a digital world. Okay, so once you've completed your wireframing, I tend to jump into UX. Some people will lump those into the same category, and that's fine if you do. But as a reference point, I have found it really helpful to break them apart. Like, so the user experience from my standpoint helps organize, navigation, content, and priority, right? So as applications have become very complex over the years, it's really helpful to figure out, like you do in the ideation phase for what to build, in the UX phase to figure out what belongs front and center, right? Versus what belongs in a hover state, a dropdown, a modal, etc. So that's where like the user experience becomes really helpful. Page loads, boom. What's the end user going to see? Okay, great. Now, what's the secondary content that you can put in dropdowns that aren't core priorities? And again, that's going to be, you're going to figure that out. You're going to have your first phase, your second phase, your third phase as you get these feedback loops, and we'll talk about that. So tools for the user experience, Figma, Adobe, Tailwinds, and Bootstrap. Those last two are a little bit more technical for the technical folks that are listening in, but they're great. They get you really far down the path without too much technology. Okay, so the next category is now we're going to start to get into like early code. The output of the early code is like a clickable prototype, whether that's on your phone, whether that's on the web. So, it'll enable you to prototype your software essentially with basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? And you're actually going to see how it works and feels. And by the way, like, I don't typically wire up a database in this phase, as it's not necessary to understand customer flows. Like, you're trying to figure out what's working and what's not working. And it's just not critical in the early phase of coding to necessarily rely on a database. And if you wanted to, I would check out Airtable. What is helpful in this phase, however, is some level of transition and animation to illustrate UX patterns and usability. So it's loading it up on your phone or the web. How are customers going through it? How are you going through it? That's really the purpose of early code, is you want to walk away with that with an understanding of what's working and not. And then you start, after that phase is complete, actually, before we get into the design polish, the tools for early code would be Figma Framer, which is a plugin for Figma, again, and then you have Tailwinds and Bootstrap. Those get you, again, moving very quickly so you can actually use it. And design polish is, we're starting to kind of work our way now towards the bottom. So over the years, like coding, design systems have become more and more standardized. So out of the box templates from, again, we talked about it, Tailwinds and Bootstrap or plugins from Figma can get you from being, quote unquote, design blind to something that is great for a minimal viable product, right? You can modify an existing style guide to match your preference, and it gets you from really basic wireframes to looking professional, like really quickly. And again, like the best tools in those categories to look at would be, Figma, like a framer, Tailwinds, Bootstrap, Google, just like style guides, and you'll be able to just download sheets of style guides, and then you can just modify them based on your wireframes, and off you go. So really the last section is, now that we've done the strategizing, the wireframing, the UX, and like we've built a minimal viable product with like a touch of nice design, right? Now we're going to really kind of code up something that we think is going to be a usable product, right? And again, the purpose of this very brief talk is to outline areas of building software people want to use. And of course, one of those, right, is going to actually have to be the programming. So let's just dive into that. The internet has certainly changed the way we think about, modern programming. There's so many options out there, but just to slightly deviate from the original outline for a moment, if you are a larger company looking to refactor your old code base, the above process holds true. With that, however, when talking about code, I'd recommend looking at JavaScript frameworks like React, Node, Angular. Again, just to name a few, there's a handful, but it's important because the next generation of programmers are leaning further into JavaScript than ever before. So if you're a manager or someone looking to hire, refactoring or building from scratch, JavaScript is probably your best bet for a handful of reasons. But again, if you're investing in the future, that's kind of where the internet is going. So that's a good place to look. So if you're thinking about your code base, I would definitely spend time in those frameworks. And lastly, feedback loops and customers. So as we round out the process and have actually built a workable product, getting immediate feedback from customers is key to getting your feedback loops rolling, right? What is working in the software and what needs to be improved from a design and then code standpoint will help you drive to a software, drive software that people not only want to use, but will ultimately fall in love with. And you really just need to rinse and repeat that process of like ideation, design, build, get in front of people, feedback loops. And again, like that process, it's a very interdisciplinary process. That's what's going to end up getting people to fall in love with what you're building. So look, real quick, because I'm going to be out of time in a minute, extra credit, Shopify, killer for e-commerce, Stripe, if you need to do payments. And then there's like really good no-code, low-code systems that if you're building really basic features or products, you really don't need to recreate the wheel. Those have gotten so good over the years. Definitely check them out. So again, the major takeaway here across all those categories is what features am I building and why? And you have to learn to say no across all those categories to get to a minimal viable product, even if it's an existing code base and you're refactoring, to get to the point where people will really want to use it. It's so much more than just coding. So I want to thank again the GitKon team for inviting me to speak. Please don't hesitate to reach out, hit me on Twitter, or shoot me an email. I'd love to see what you're working on and answer any questions. Thanks again.
Welcome back. In software development, sometimes things don't go to plan, as I'm sure a lot of you may know. However, our next talk will provide guidance when dealing with unknowns. Please help me welcome Kyle Fransham, VP of Research and Development at Superna. A longtime veteran of big data and cloud computing, Kyle leverages his experience from Silicon Valley-based research institutes to lead Superna's charge in cutting-edge software development. Joining Kyle is our very own Adam Wride. As Chief Product Officer at GitKraken, Adam leads strategy and innovation efforts designed to help developers collaborate and thrive. Take it away, Adam and Kyle.
All right, welcome to this session of GitKon. I'm here with Kyle Fransham with Superna. I'll let him do an introduction in here just a minute, but my name is Adam Wride. I'm the Chief Product Officer for GitKraken. I joined a couple years ago through an acquisition of my company. So Kyle, before we get started on our topic of discussion today, why don't you give us a quick introduction on who you are and what Superna does and what challenges and what are you guys, what are you trying to solve?
Sure. Hey, well, hey, Adam, and thanks for having me on the session today. I'm really happy to be here and be talking about Superna. Superna is a company that writes data protection and disaster recovery software for large enterprise. I've been here for a really long time, probably about 12 years, and I've seen our product grow from the initial sketch on the whiteboard through to the initial implementation to now we're in many thousands of customers worldwide. Customers are banks and hospitals and law offices and media and government, really not just Fortune 500, but Fortune 10,000 enterprises. I am VP R&D. I really wear the VP Eng hat, so I oversee all of our software development efforts from UX to development to QA to project management, and documentation. It all kind of rolls up into one coordinated software development effort.
Okay, awesome. So you've been there since the beginning. I'm interested to know how have you seen that evolve in terms of organizing the development team from small teams to what you are today? And if you can, because planning, and that's what the topic that we want to get into today is solving for that unknown, right? Developing for an unknown set of requirements, changing requirements, customers that come in later in the maturity of the product. But I'm interested to learn from you, how are you organized today and how has that changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so, massive change since we started, right? At the beginning, we were a few developers in a single room and, no real formal process. We would organize ourselves by communication and by email, and we used Basecamp for a little while, and that was the start. And really, when we were a small team, that worked just fine. And throughout our evolution, as we've grown, you hit sort of different size milestones, and then different amounts of process start to make sense. Moving more towards an agile thing, moving towards regular sprint cadences. At the start, we didn't even have code review, right? So now, of course, we have a full software development lifecycle, and code goes through code review and CI/CD and all of that stuff, right? So everything that has been built up to make us, I won't say a mature software development organization, because I'm not sure actually any organization can really claim to hit maturity, my estimation anyway, or shouldn't. We're continuing to evolve, but we have processes and tools in place now that really make sense for our current org. So the company itself is about 135 people. We're in a fairly rapid growth phase. We've almost doubled the size of the company in the past year, which comes with its own challenges and obviously comes with its own need for different processes and tools. In the engineering org, we're structured into 6 different sprint teams. Those have bi-weekly sprints, and we aim for monthly releases. We started that as a goal at the start of 2023. Before that, we were in a release where it makes sense mode, like more of a content-based release model. We've moved to a time-bounded release model, and that's had all sorts of benefits, mainly measurable in terms of our QA metrics, actually. And I can talk some more about those, but the teams are organized into those, and we really put all stakeholders are in the same Scrum teams. So, development and QA and UX all work together to, deliver ultimately a shipping product. Typically, 2-week sprints followed by a couple of cleanup sprints, and we do some tech debt remediation in there. We really do carve out time for tech debt remediation just to keep our platform moving forward in the
do you change up these sprint teams often, or do they stay together over 3, 4 or more sprints?
3, 4 or more sprints is typical. There's different. They're very fluid, right? And where it makes sense, where we need to work more on a given initiative or work less on a given initiative. Some of our key members will tend to float a little bit between teams. Sometimes people are on multiple teams at once. And like anything, we'll start an initiative, we'll take it through to completion, and then maybe there's 1 or 2 people left on maintenance there part-time, but those talented folks move towards other sort of more forward-looking projects, right? So people tend to move around, yeah.
And so in your role, I'm sure you're responsible for delivering on the requirements from the business, right?
Right.
The requirements come down to you, and it's your team's responsibility for delivering on time with the right quality, the right features, et cetera. What do you do in terms of meetings and tools to help you do that? You mentioned sprints, but what else do you do?
We start every release, like if we have a monthly release, we start that 7 weeks before. And that starts with a meeting between the engineering team and product, where product management really outlines, okay, here's our high running features. We give the engineers a week to scope out those features. So, that happens up till week 6 before the release. And they'll work with product management to make sure they understand exactly how it goes. And development will produce a design estimate, QA produces a test estimate. And those 2 individuals will have to work together, and whether it's a story or an epic, to produce like a best guess estimate on how long this feature is going to take. If that slides into the current release, then great. If that's more than a month, then it can be extended. In the case of like a longer epic, we can slot it into a future release, and that's okay. So it really starts from that. We use Jira quite heavily, of course. Requirements initially go into product board, and then product board, we export that into Jira. And then Jira is where most of the engineers will live. We export data from Jira into Smartsheet, and Smartsheet gives us a roll-up of all the metrics that we really want to pull from the development process. So things like defect escape rates and how many release notes we've added to a release, and the time that individuals are spending on certain things. This is an area actually where Team Insights for Jira, we've started using it, and it's really, really helped. We used to take all that data and put it into Smartsheet, and it was a job for our project manager, and it took quite a long time to munch all that data to understand who worked on what. Now we have that kind of nicely laid out, and that's helpful for a bunch of reasons for sure.
Great. I'm glad you're finding it useful. You mentioned that it feels like your team is fairly mature. The processes are fairly mature, but there's always room for improvement. What do you find is your biggest challenge as you're making plans and as you're reviewing a release? What do you find what do you keep running into?
So repeatedly, we run into the unknown unknowns. And at Superna, we write software that's deployed into environments that we can't predict and we can't understand in advance. And the requirements of a federal defense customer running a dark site, to the requirements of a multinational bank, to a media enterprise, they all have data centers that are quite different from each other and quite different from what we can predict in advance. We really, of course, try our best to understand those requirements, and instead of building that up in advance, we really have to be in a mode where we take that input from everywhere we deploy to and then build it in. So that really means, though, occasionally we're going to have to jump on a problem. And I call them problems, but maybe that's not the right word. It's here's an environment or here's a challenge where we've gone in and we've attempted to integrate with all these pieces in a customer's environment. And for whatever reason, they have something that's configured differently from what we expect. Maybe it's firewall, maybe it's networking, maybe it's a version of Active Directory. Like, we can't say in advance. And so it really, for us to be,
you're not managing it.
right. For us to be in this mode, we have to take that input and bring it into our development process. And occasionally that means, everything that we've laid out that we want to do for this next release or 2 releases or 3 releases, there's a big thing that gets dumped right in the middle. And we consciously accept that. We decide that this is going to happen, and we're ready for, those type of disruptions. Maybe that takes a couple of our senior engineers, our most senior dev and our most senior QA, to work on a problem and really get it nailed. But if they're doing that for a sprint or 2, then, our deliverables are going to start to drift.
When you get these sort of out of band, call them feature requests or support problems, do you ship a different? Do you ship that to that one customer, or do you just include it in your next regular release?
We include it in the next regular release. We really, really have drawn a line in the sand that we're not going to make branches for customers. I've seen that pitfall before, and you end up with a trillion different branches moving out, and then it becomes, a maintenance headache, right? Because you have to port changes across all branches. So we really use trunk-based development. We really merge everything back into the master branch. We figure that if it's a problem or a challenge at site A, that's probably going to be a challenge at site B also. Depending on the severity of it, we can cut an intermediate patch release if we need to. And then sometimes we would deliver that to the specific affected customer, but that fix always then rolls into our next scheduled release.
Yeah, that sounds a lot of like some of the challenges we have with our Git integration product on data center, because we don't manage that environment. They set it up, they can host it wherever they want, they can choose to upgrade or not upgrade, right? It's absolutely a challenge. Okay. What about blind spots? In terms of data, when you're trying to understand, what went into a sprint, what, are we doing well as a team? Are we not doing well as a team? Where is some place that you wish you had more visibility into that problem?
Yeah. So, the blind spots sometimes are in the unscheduled work for like the senior members of the team, right? And like everybody, we can track velocity, and we can track velocity by individual contributor also. This is really a metric I don't like to use, and I don't like to share, right? But if you were to track story points per developer or tasks per developer, for example, sometimes you see a little bit of a curve, right? Like the initial, like a newer developer is going to be producing at a certain rate. An intermediate developer is probably producing at the highest rate. And then a senior dev, actually their production tails off according to like this made up, like terrible metric. And it's why I don't like to use it, because your senior contributors then are spending their time helping the others, right? They're the ones who are supporting those intermediates who are, getting like knocking off all of these tasks, and who's, on paper, their metrics look great. The senior devs are the ones who are, consulting. They're doing the most complex of code reviews. They're looking at something that happened from the field. And the more data we can get from that, the better. Ultimately, if we can understand where those senior people are spending their time, that's step one. And so, there's a blind spot when it comes in from the field, right? And sometimes those requests are asynchronous or ad hoc. It's a customer support member who talks directly to a dev and says like, hey, I really need help here. And that's still a blind spot. But what's started to really work is where those senior devs are supporting the intermediate devs. If they're commenting on code reviews, or if they're, interacting in a Jira ticket, we do have visibility to that now. And that's really, really valuable, because we can actually see, okay, you are spending 50% of your time working on non-feature stuff. And that then becomes a metric that we can use going back into planning, right? When anybody gives you an estimate. So we'll ask devs and QA to produce an estimate, and that estimate always is in terms of here's how much time I think this is going to take me if I'm uninterrupted, right? Nobody ever plans for their own interruptions, and that's fine. So if we can take that data and then combine it with, okay, so you said this is going to take you, 6 days to accomplish, but really we understand that, you're spending 50% of your time not on this. Well, let's allocate 12 days for it. And you can do that on an individual level, and then that works out really well.
I like that you appreciate how work is distributed between sort of junior developers, intermediate, and senior developers, because you're absolutely right. We expect and want senior developers to be coding all day long, because in theory they're the best prepared to do that, but they're actually, as you said, not often able to do that because they're in such a high leverage position to be able to help intermediate and junior developers get, level up and get more done inside the organization. That was one of the problems, not as well thought out, admittedly, but one of the reasons that we created Team Insights for Jira is we wanted to give credit for those non-code, efforts that were going into the full piece of work, right, but don't show up in the traditional ways of just, lines of code or, someone's PR getting shipped. It takes a lot of work to get requirements put together. It takes a lot of work to map the problem, to get it, shaped the right way. Then there's the work, and then there's code review, and there's QA, and there's all these other follow-up deployment. And with sort of the very simple and older models of evaluating work, you're not giving full credit for all of the work getting done.
Yeah, 100% agree. And, as a little plug, that's something that we got on Team Insights for Jira over the last sort of 6 months, I guess. And it's been extremely valuable to help us figure out that information, right? We were trying to pull it out ourselves in Smartsheet before, but yeah, now that we have it just at a dashboard at our fingertips, it's really, really nice.
Yeah. So along those lines, what data should teams be looking at the end of a retrospective, or as they're, we're always tweaking our organization, right? We're always thinking about new ways to work. How should we look at data to inform those processes?
Yeah, one piece of data that I really like to look at in those cases is the number of release noted defects that get added to our sort of release note backlog on a sprint. And you can categorize release notes as something that, is deficient enough in the product that we need to tell customers about it. Maybe it's a bug, or maybe it's part of a feature that wasn't fully implemented. But that's a really, really good metric to say, okay, we did this, we planned it, but here's how successful we were at planning it. And so the teams have an objective this year to have a decreasing trend in the number of release notes. So we track our release note backlog. I'd love to just flatten it to zero, never going to happen. But what we want is that, on a release by release basis, the trend tends to go down. And this really helps people, not just at the end of the process, but throughout the process, right? We really try and get QA involved with the developers up front, and QAs, building the test plans and their testing as developers are producing, work. And if the devs are encouraged to have a decreasing number of release notes, if QA says like, this isn't good, like we're going to have to release note it, then the devs are, more apt to take that extra step and to consider the corner cases and to produce, software that's of higher quality. So while that's like a quality metric, it's actually really, really useful for understanding like velocity and how well you're completing, not just, checking a box is done. Truly finishing it. And that's something that's hard to plan for, but it's a metric that we use like quite successfully, I think, to understand that actually we are like done.
Yeah. It's so interesting talking to different leaders of software development organizations, because we're all doing similar work, but we all do it in different ways, and we have different metrics, and based on the business, based on who our customers are and what they demand from us, we measure ourselves differently, and that's really interesting. I like that metric in terms of, hey, are we shipping software that is finished and not with all these caveats about coming soon. Very good. Well, Kyle, I really appreciate taking the time today to chat with us. Best of luck at Saperna, and continue your great journey there, and hope to have you on another time.
Yeah, well, thanks, Adam. It's been a real pleasure, and I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you, Adam and Kyle, for lighting the way into the unknown. Let's keep that light shining by lighting the beacons. Shawna O'Neill is co-founder of a remote web agency that works with brands across the globe to develop their big ideas. With lessons inspired by Boromir from The Lord of the Rings, Shawna's here to share her guide for better dev communication. But wait, we have one more light to shine first. It's our final GitKon prize winner. And that winner is, let me put a little drum roll. And the winner is Tony Jones, who is a solutions architect at Sandia National Laboratories in New Mexico. Congratulations, Tony, and to all of our fabulous prize winners. Tony, someone will be in contact with you to get you some information about how to collect your prize. Okay, Shawna, on with the show.
Greetings, adventurers. Welcome to GitKon 2023. I'm Shawna O'Neill. I'm a web developer and co-founder at Dodgy Code, and I'm here today to talk about how we can light the beacons towards better communications between developers on our team. Now, if you're familiar with the Fellowship, you're probably also familiar with Boromir. He's one of the human members of the Fellowship who is ultimately trying to represent and save his nation of Gondor. On the Fellowship, Boromir has many strengths, but he also has quite a few weaknesses. He tends to have a very efficient and singular mindset on wanting to take the Ring of Power and bring it back to his nation, which has been fighting a war against the Dark Forces. He believes that harnessing the power of the ring and bringing it back home will allow them to win the war and ultimately save the continent. Now, unfortunately, there's some flaws to Boromir's logic, which the rest of the party have tried to explain, and which largely Boromir accepts being outnumbered, but it creates a lot of miscommunications and frustrations along the way. Ultimately, Boromir doesn't make it to the second movie or the second book as a result of him making some dire mistakes that result in him sacrificing himself to allow Frodo and Sam to escape. Spoilers, sorry. Now, when it comes to developers and their communications, we can often fall into the same pitfall where individually we can see the best road to success in our minds, but we have to communicate with other developers on the team and their focuses and goals in order to achieve our project. Now, when we're working together, especially in a more remote setting, it's not always easy to have direct communications, such as, talking to a coworker or hopping into an email thread. And code's really difficult to talk about in a text format anyways. So we need to talk about indirect communication, which are the things we use, the beacons, if you will, such as what Gondor uses to call for aid. We need to discuss what our beacons can be in order to signal to the other developers on our team the information that they need to know in order to do their work, as well as the issues and traps that can come along in a project. So how can we work together without one of us running off with the ring? And to do that, we really need to invest in some tasks that allow us to get that communication going. So, lighting the beacons. Some of you may already be familiar with some of these tools, but if you need the refresher, now's a good time to revisit them. The first one we'll talk about is code comments. We're all familiar with those, and doc blocks. So code comments are the little comments you put in your code to say like, hey, like this for loop goes through and does this slightly funky thing and outputs whatever. The doc blocks are a little different in the fact that they are always paired up with functions. When you create custom functions, you really want to put a chunk of commented code before them. There's, depending on your coding language, there's usually a format for these. You can look them up. But you want to have the title of the function, so get all blogs in my world, a brief description of what it does. It gets all the blogs. And but not only that, it orders them by most recent post date and collects the authors by last name. That's important, and we should include that in our description. Next up, we'll put the parameters, and that would be, maybe a date range. It could be, blogs of a certain category, whatever makes sense for a function. Those parameters should include their type, such as integer, float. It's useful to put rich text in the description text, but these should always be actual data types. What the function returns, whether that's null or a Boolean, a true or false, or whether it returns some kind of value, and what the expectation of that value should be. When you make doc blocks and code comments, it's an easy way for a developer to consistently see how something is meant to work. It takes the guesswork out. It takes less reading every single line of code to understand what a function does. And the more abstracted your code base is, the more this is going to save time and frustration. It gets all the developers on the same page without interrupting their flow of work, and they're allowed to see this information as they're working on a project. And as Boromir here says, one does not simply read the code and understand it in a few seconds. Next up, we have the good old README file. A README file is something a lot of developers neglect to do, or they will do it and only put maybe a one-liner of like, this is for project ABC. The README file lives in the Git repository. You can view these on the Git websites, you can view them in GitKraken, but ultimately a good way to facilitate project communications, particularly to new developers on a project, is to make sure that this README file is fleshed out. You're going to want to include the name of the project, so what the code repo is for, whether it's a part of a larger project or whether, in my case, it's a full website. You would put a description, maybe some contact info for who the client is, if it's a client-owned repository. You should always include the technologies and libraries that you use. Even if you're a developer who consistently uses the same set of libraries, a new developer coming in or a new company getting onboarded, or maybe even just like a contractor, isn't necessarily going to have that insider knowledge. So you should include whether you're using PHP, what flavor, Laravel, you name it. Any libraries you're using, such as frameworks. In my world, that could be things like Vue.js versus React. In addition to maybe any custom libraries that you've included and where they've been included from. Instructions for how to contribute to the project. A lot of teams have different contribution flows. Some of them use a checks and balances using Git commits and approval and merge flows. Other places just have a branching system, such as Git flow. It all depends. So include how to correctly contribute to the project on the README. You should include instructions for bug reporting. If you're using an external bug reporting source, include that in here. If you are working on an open source project, how you would like people to format bug reporting, how they would like to tag it in Git, if you're going to use Git issues, or a link to where you would like those bugs reported. Top level explanations of custom functionality. If you're extending an existing code base, you should include what you extended it with, what you've included, what you've added, top level information about what it does and where it is located in the repo. You should include relevant project links. This includes external libraries. This includes links to integrations. So if you're integrating with a particular API, you should definitely include those links inside of your README. And finally, you should include some contact information in case this project is ever adopted by someone else down the line. They need to know where to contact if they need access, if they need permissions edited, if they need assistance with understanding what's going on in the code base. You should try and keep this information as up to date as possible. But realistically, depending on your industry, you may only have to do this once. Another one most developers are familiar with, but are maybe not consistently using in a friendly fellowship way, is the Git commit messages. When you commit to Git, you have the ability to put in a very short message to go along with your commit. And frequently what we see happen is developers will make that short message something like made edits. It's not very useful. It doesn't really tell anyone else what they edited. Or in other cases, they will make edits to multiple things, but only include one of the pieces they've edited in the message. So they may edit 4 different pieces of functionality, but only mention one in the commit message. The best way to use your Git commit messages is to break up the commit into multiple. If there's a lot of things being edited, you should keep the scope of that commit pretty narrow. So if I'm going to edit my blog postings, I probably want it to talk about blogs in my commit message and only include edits to the blogs in that commit. If I'm also going to edit an API on top of that, and I have a bunch of files that I need to commit all at once, I should really separate those changes out into 2 commits. When the commits really overlap, do your best to just have a top level, blogs, edits to blog format, and API call improvements. Something that just indicates to another developer that you have made changes to something to do with blogs and something to do with integration XYZ. That way, when someone's skimming through all of the commits and all the changes, they have a rough idea of what's changed recently, or at least what sections of the project have been altered. They can also get a little bit of a lit beacon, if you will, of whether there could be potential issues. For example, if you have a system-wide update on the commit messages, then someone who's been working in another portion of the project knows that they may need to make some updates to the work they've been in progress to meet the requirements of the new updated system. This also helps developers at a glance see what's going on in other portions of the project. So if they encounter an unexpected bug, they can see if it's related to any recent changes. Finally, all of this requires consistency. This quote is from a fantasy author named R.A. Salvatore. He explains that fantasy is perhaps more than any other genre. The character is rewarded for making the right choices and punished for making the bad. Ask Boromir. Boromir from Lord of the Rings meets a tragic end due to the mistakes that he has made. And at his end, he realizes those mistakes and encourages the fellowship to move on and to continue together without him. And he acknowledges his pitfalls. And it's very tragic, it's very sad, and it's quite beautiful at the same time. But as developers, we need to take ownership of our role and our contribution when it comes to miscommunication. When we choose to put a git commit message that says made updates, we're contributing to miscommunication. When we skip doing the README or just toss one sentence in, figuring that it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, get the project out there, we're contributing to miscommunication. So the best practice that you can partake in is to be consistent, to create templates and patterns. You can make a Git README and use it for every project after the first one and just update the content in it. It's the best way to go about it. You don't have to start from scratch every time, but keeping up with these habits is how you solidify solid team communication without having to schedule another stand-up or another Hail Mary, let's get together and solve these issues. This is preventative, it's consistent, and it doesn't pull your devs out of their workflow, and it allows you to light the beacons to call for aid whenever you should need it. And with that, I'll leave you to the rest of GitKon. Have a fantastic adventure, and I hope you bring this back to your fellowship back home.
Welcome back. This next session is perfect for those of you who are currently involved in open source projects or are looking to get more involved. Join Ruth Cheesley as she shares her experience leading an open source project towards independence. Ruth is an open source advocate with over 18 years of experience using and contributing to many different projects. Having served on the community leadership team of the Joomla project and built a full-service digital agency, Ruth now works as project lead for Mautic, supporting the community who build and maintain the world's first open source marketing automation platform. The stage is yours, Ruth.
Greetings everyone, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you about quite a captivating topic, the shift in governance from ownership by a corporate entity towards becoming an independent open source project. We'll be taking a deep dive into Mautic's journey, painting a picture of how it transitioned from corporate ownership to independence. My hope is that we'll get to explore the role of governance changes, the challenges encountered around finance, the significance of transparency, and of course shaping a new vision for product development. So let's kick things off with a bit of a history lesson. Imagine an open source project that has a corporate owner. Well, what does that look like? In Mautic's early days, the dynamic was exactly that. A dominant corporate owner in essence meant that there was a strong financial backing, resource backing, and an established framework of contributing to the software and managing the releases from predominantly one company. In this case, the company was created by the founder to provide a hosted enterprise solution based on the open source software. This was then later acquired by Acquia in 2019, who integrated it into their industry-leading marketing cloud software stack. Having such a support can be really beneficial, and indeed with Mautic it was instrumental to the growth of the project and the community. But on the flip side, it could also mean less community control and potential conflicts between corporate and community interests, and a heavy dependence on a business whose priorities may change as the economy and therefore their future plans change. In Mautic's case, there's been a steady growth in the number of companies and individuals who were contributing over the past years, but the project was effectively still owned and managed by Acquia. In 2023, it became clear that Acquia was unable to support Mautic's ongoing growth, and the decision was made for Mautic to become an independent, standalone open source project. So that sets the scene. Transitioning an open source project like Mautic to become an independent project is no easy feat. It's an exciting, thrilling, yet challenging journey, sometimes akin to tightrope walking while juggling your grand's best china plates. In some ways, we were quite fortunate as we already had fiscal transparency through our Open Collective. The Open Source Collective, our fiscal host, we're able to take ownership of our brand and our trademarks and continue to provide our financial management services, including employment services. Without this, we would have had to create and staff a non-profit, something that we just did not have the resources to do at the time. Some of the key aspects that we have been working on include rewriting our governance model, which Acquia had ownership of and was embedded throughout the model, and establishing ways for generating revenue streams through memberships, trials, services, swag, events, and many more. Amongst the challenges was preserving the trust and the confidence of the community during this whole process, ensuring that the project did not lose its essence, value, and momentum whilst navigating this change. The key was in maintaining open communication, thorough planning for the new structure, and listening, truly listening, to the community's thoughts and feedback. Community confidence was the tide that made the ship of change sail smoothly. Some of the ways that we managed this included creating public open discussion rooms on a range of topics and welcoming anyone into the conversations, especially around governance. Working publicly in shared documents which allowed anyone to give us their thoughts, share their feedbacks, air their concerns, and also share their research if they've done research on a particular area or had experience from their experience in other open source projects. And finally, when we had a finished version, we broke it out into individual sections and we had one forum thread per section, which allowed a much wider community consultation before we made final decisions, final versions, and then adopted new models. With the financial side of things, we had some brainstorming and idea generation workshops within the leadership team, which highlighted several channels for exploration. Some of these tied in directly with the work we were doing on governance. For example, we were looking at implementing a way of becoming a member, which would give you voting rights, and then you would have to physically pay to become a member. That's one route to becoming a member, which obviously ties in with the fundraising. But others were entirely separate projects that would need to be started and that would stand alone. But the key thing here was making sure that we were not just begging for money, although there is always some aspect of that when you're maintaining an open source project, of course. But we were actually trying to deliver something of value to the people who were giving us money in exchange for what was being offered. In the example of providing a trial of the software, if the user wishes to, they could take their trial data and spin up their own Mautic instance afterwards. Or they could go with another provider. But they also have the option to continue in a hosted capacity with our contracted provider, who will give 40% of the revenue back to the Mautic community, therefore allowing the user to have a reliable hosted instance, which is one of the major things that people want to have when they first get started with Mautic. Also allows them to just have a trial and kick the tires. But then if they want to continue, they have a route they can do that, which is actually giving back to the community. So by paying to go with the contracted provider who's offering the trials, they're actually supporting the community in that way. With membership, the individual and corporate members will be featured in a searchable database, helping raise their profile in the community and hopefully getting interesting projects coming through for them to work on from people in our community who need their services. As a member, they also get to vote on a range of things, from who might sit on the next council, even to put themselves forward to be a council member or a team leader, through to what kind of features should be implemented, where we might hold events in our next in-person schedule, and so forth. So that's something limited just to members. So that's the things that we've been working on. What about the whole process of transitioning? Well, it doesn't just mean changes in ownership and leadership of the project. It also means moving to a mindset where there is shared responsibility in the governance distributed among community members. The new model emphasises that it's not just the leaders who shape the future of the project, but every single contributor. The role of the community becomes exceedingly prominent in influencing product development and ensuring that the values of openness and collaboration are upheld. The new vision for Mautic encapsulates a project governed by its community, with decisions shaped collectively, ensuring increased transparency and deepening trust. It's in this shared responsibility that Mautic's independence truly finds expression. It probably won't surprise you to know that we're actually using an open source tool called Decidim as our central platform for all things governance. It's a really amazing tool used by European cities like Barcelona to provide citizen-driven democracy, and we are just in the pre-release stages of testing it before we launch. So to wrap things up, what I would say is what's crucial in such a transition. I'd repeat 3 words: leadership, transparency, and trust. Leadership, ultimately, whether that's one person, a group of people, a collective, sets the course. It determines where we're going and how we're planning to get there. Transparency establishes trust and brings the rest of the community along on that journey. It's not just about the leaders making the decisions, it's about us all deciding and us all getting involved in what the future of this project is. And trust, well, trust is honestly what binds a community together, and that's probably one of the most important things to focus on if you're going through such a transition in your project. If there's something we learn from Mautic's journey, it's that inspiring confidence in the community requires leaders to steer with transparency and listen to their crew, the community. The value of an independent governance structure within open source projects lies in fostering a genuine sense of project ownership for all contributors. Independent doesn't mean alone, it means being in it together. And in the end, that's what open source is about. A collective effort driving innovation, growth, and success. Thank you so much for your attention. Let's continue this conversation. Ask questions, share your experiences, because we all learn from each other. Because as they say, in unity there is strength, and with open source, we are all in it together. If you have any questions, if there's anything you'd like to know about anything that I've talked about over the last 10 minutes or so, I'm more than happy to answer those questions in the chat. I'll also be available if you've got anything that you'd like to talk about offline. Do drop me an email at any time, ruth.cheesley@mautic.org, or you can ping me on most social networks using the @rcheesley handle. Thanks so much for having me at GitKon. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and I'm looking forward to hearing what your questions are in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, for sharing Mautic's case study with us. All right, you may have heard the phrase shifting left, which is about prioritizing something earlier in your thought and or development processes. But have you thought about what it means to shift left on IAM testing and security? Bardhan Mishra is an engineer at LocalStack working at improving the developer experience of engineers developing and testing cloud applications on AWS. Harsh is also an AWS builder in the serverless category and has previously worked at Red Hat, HackerRank, and QuanSite. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to shift. Tell us all about it, Harsh.
Hello everyone, my name is Harsh. I'm an engineer at LocalStack and an AWS community builder in the serverless category. Today, I'm here to talk about how you can shift left on IAM testing and security on your local developer machines without having to test them on staging or on production cloud. Shift left is a term that you might have often heard around in the development and testing lifecycle. Essentially, it means that the DevOps engineers collaborate and work together to ensure application security right from the start. In more traditional sense of software development lifecycle or SDLC, you will always find security and testing to be a later phase of the process. With an emphasis on shift left, we intend to bring software testing and security as early as possible in the SDLC. So what exactly does shifting left on testing and security mean for us? Well, we want the development and operations team to work together hand in hand towards enabling processes and toolings that can let the business ship good quality software in a safe and secure manner. With shift left, you won't need to depend on the later phases of the SDLC to test and secure applications. Rather, you can perform your validations earlier in the development lifecycle. Some good examples of this can be to implement toolings that help the security scale with the development, or run custom automated security checks to find vulnerabilities in your continuous integration pipelines and more. This helps mitigate any security threats or issues that could compromise the organization, the users, and the infrastructure on which the software has been deployed. To understand how shift left can work with public cloud service providers, such as AWS in this example, we need to take a look at the shared responsibility model. It's a fundamental concept for understanding security testing, which states that the public cloud is responsible for the security of the cloud, while customers are responsible for the security in the cloud. This means that us as a developer need to be responsible for using these cloud services securely and implementing robust security measures for our own workloads, right from our local developer machines to actual production environments. AWS, or in fact, every major public cloud service provider, recommend 3 major areas for security in the cloud, and that is configuration, access, and data. There are various solutions that help you to solve such problems, like monitoring misconfigurations in your cloud and serverless applications, detecting and responding to threats, ensuring compliance against best practices, and much more. However, that doesn't exactly quite happen. In a report by Gartner, 75% of all cloud security breaches happen due to inadequate permission management. If we go back to our previous topic on shared responsibility model, we wish to get a hold of the access and identities that every human or cloud service has, which include a set of permission and entitlements. It is always difficult to understand who has access to what resources and what actions those identities are able to perform. This is no minor task, especially when you deploy a ton of cloud or serverless applications that have hundreds of millions of individual permissions, and nailing them down is a humongous task. So let's start with the root and try to answer a few of the most common identity challenges a customer might come up with. You can start by asking some of these hard questions to yourself, like what resources can be accessed by the public? What services and resources does a user has access to? What are the effective permissions of a policy? Which services do you effectively allow access to? Which services do you effectively deny access to? What are some of the overlapping policies and levels of permissions among the different users and service accounts you create? But the final and the most important question is, who actually has access to what in the cloud? And this is a really crucial question. And the answer is something that's very idealistic. That's something that's most important for everyone out there. And the ideal state to reach here is that every user or service account in your cloud should have a least privilege access. And this can be only possible when every user or service account gets the minimum amount of permissions needed to perform a given task. But let us try to hypothesize this a bit. What if we wanted to start right from the application level when you're actually building your application infrastructure, maybe pushing it to a branch on the central repository, triggering a continuous integration workflow and merging it to build and push to production? All of this while ensuring that you have not specified over-permissive roles or accidentally exposed public data or had a poor credential management. This is where public cloud emulators such as LocalStack can basically help you out. LocalStack is a cloud service emulator that basically lets you run your entire cloud stack in a Docker container on your local machine or your continuous integration environment. And this basically lets you run your cloud and serverless applications without having to connect to a real public cloud account. This simply means that your cloud resources are now available locally inside a single Docker container, and you can run your automated tests on your application without having to set up costly developer accounts, slow redeployments, or transient errors from remote connections whatsoever. One of the most popular services supported by LocalStack is identity and access management. which means that you can create users and policies right on your developer machine. The best part about this is that you can actually use such a setup to test your security policies and create a more realistic environment that closely resembles the real public cloud. While a lot of people use local stack for infrastructure and application development, one of the most crucial use case is cloud security and entitlement management, where you can follow a zero trust security model and have the principle of least privilege state that simply states that every user, application, and system should have only the access and permissions that they need to do their jobs. Let's try this out in a demo and get to experience what it is like to shift left on IAM security without having to leave your local developer machines. So in this demonstration, I will showcase a simple infrastructure as code pipeline to set up a very basic AWS solution with Lambda, API Gateway, S3, and VPC. I have a really simple architecture diagram that demonstrates this, where we have isolated developer environment where our dev and test loops can happen. And we have our real cloud environment where we can deploy our applications on production. We can deploy this solution using multiple options such as Terraform, Pulumi, AWS CDK. But for this example, I will just rather go with CDK itself, which is a software development framework that is used to model and provision your cloud application resources on AWS. To get started, I have a simple Docker Compose configuration that spins up a local stack container right on your developer machine. And we have a bunch of environmental variables such as enforce IAM soft mode. This is something that you will be taking a look at in the later stage of this particular demo. But let's actually get started. Let's maybe get started with running our local stack Docker container and get to see about how we can set up our entire IAM testing solution stack on our developer machine itself. So first I'm gonna start my local stack container using the makefile targets that I have already specified. So I'm gonna start this with make start. This is gonna take a couple of seconds, but now you can get to see that your local stack container has started, and you can move pretty rapidly with this. I can go to my other terminal and I can specify the targets that I have already specified. So the very first target that I have right here is local AWS CDK bootstrap, which means that I am going to bootstrap my entire CDK project. And that basically means that it will set up the S3 bucket and the required IAM policies for me right on my local machine itself. So I'm gonna hit enter. This is gonna install a few dependencies, and once done, it will start bootstrapping my entire CDK project right here. This step is gonna take another couple of seconds here and there. And once completed, you will get to see that your CDK environment has been bootstrapped, and you can get to see all the local stack logs happening right over here. So this installs a bunch of dependencies and stuff. And you can get to see right here that our environment has bootstrapped right here. So let's go ahead and let's try to deploy our stack right on our local developer machine. This will take slightly short as per my experience. And once done, we will get an output URL, which will specify the API gateway URL that we have just deployed right here. And this will basically allow us to send request to our backend, which is specified in a Lambda function. And we can get a very simple JSON message as an output. So nothing very fancy, but it is a really crucial example to exactly test out things in a really easy basis. So we have the API gateway URL. So maybe I can just hit curl right here, and I can get the output, which will be in form of a JSON itself. So this is going to spin up the local stack Lambda container. And once done, you can get to see that hello there. Cool. So we have specified a very simple architecture right here. It just deploys. You can deploy the same architecture on the production itself, and it will behave pretty normally. But this is going to blow up in production. And the reason is very simple. We have misconfigured a few IAM policies in this application, which would be noticeable once your application is realistically running on production. This scenario is pretty tricky since we don't know about it. CDK doesn't identify these plain misconfigurations, and you don't wish to wait for your production to blow up because of these slight hiccups after all. So to identify this, we introduced a new configuration variable called as enforce IAM. And this basically means that you're going to strictly enforce your identity and access management policies across the local cloud sandbox environment. And this means that if the IAM users and policies are going wrong, CDK will end up in error and your application would fail to deploy. And that was pretty expected. So let us enforce IAM over here. Maybe I'm gonna stop my local stack instance for a second and maybe spin it up once again. This would give us a clean state where we can get started with the whole thing all over again. So I'm gonna say make start, and let me go back over here, and I can use the same commands that I have specified before. This time they are gonna be much faster. So we are again gonna specify the bootstrap operation that is going to bootstrap our entire CDK project. This is going to work pretty fine. And once this is done, we can specify make AWS CDK deploy. So let's go ahead and let's actually do that once this operation is complete. And yes, it is complete. So maybe I can specify the deploy operation. And over here, we will get to see that this entire deploy operation would just fail out of the box. So maybe I can just maximize this terminal a bit so that everything is clearly visible. And if I go right here, I guess you can get to see a few of the log messages right over here. So you can see that the request for service SSM by principal this has for operation get parameter has been denied. You can see some of the other logs right over here that one permission has been implicitly denied. You can also see like 0 permissions have been explicitly allowed. So if we actually go to our CDK output right now, you can get to see that the deployment has failed. And the reason is pretty simple, that the access to the specified resource is denied right over here. So we know what has gone wrong, but what if we want to fix this? We simply don't want to just scroll through the logs and like get to see like what are all the things that we can try to fix right over here. So in this case, there is something that's called as a soft mode. You can just go over there and you can enable it, but I would actually have to go again and maybe start my local stack container all over again. This is gonna stop my container and start it once again. And this time, if we actually go ahead and maybe let's say bootstrap the whole CDK stack and try to deploy it all over again, we won't see that our CDK output has failed. We won't see that the CDK deployment has failed outright, but we would definitely get to see that log messages are being printed that simply signify that a few of the IAM permissions are kind of missing and you actually need to fix them before you deploy them on the production. So maybe I can just go over there. I can say deploy. And once you visit right over here, you can get to see that the same log messages are being printed, but this time local stack is not failing your entire CDK deployment. Rather, it is telling you on a very plain term that, hey, some of the permissions are missing out, some of the permissions are not specified, and some of the operations are pretty much denied right here. So I guess again, I can specify that I want to deploy this stack. And once this is done, we can get to see that our CDK stack has been completely deployed. That's pretty sweet. But this is exactly how you can have a very simple setup on your machine itself, or you can definitely test and integrate your IAM policies without having to blow something up on the production and getting to see that something is not working out. So now you have to actually debug out and fix out your IAM policies and permissions. One of the most interesting things that I want to showcase right over here is something that we call as live policy streams. And this basically allows you to generate an IAM policy right from your AWS calls. So you can easily specify it using the local stack CLI. You can just say like local stack AWS IAM stream. And this is gonna start the whole live policy stream right over here. So if I just go to a separate terminal and maybe I use a very simple AWS CLI command, I have listed out my S3 buckets using AWS local, which is a wrapper script over the AWS CLI itself. So all of my local buckets have been printed right over here that my CDK stack has created. But if I go back to my terminal, you can get to see that the IAM policies are actually being printed right over here. This is actually very, very interesting. So I can use the same API gateway URL. I can try to execute that. And over here, you will also get to see that the same live policy stream is actually printing a bunch of policies right here. And you can actually use them to get to see about how the local emulator is creating the resources with limited policies, and you can test these interactions at the runtime itself to evaluate what permissions are being used and whether you need to fix them at all. So yes, that was pretty much with the demo part. Now, the theme of this GitKon is collaboration in development, and you can do the same with your IAM policies by using local stack cloud pods. So cloud pods provide an exciting functionality. It basically allows you to take a snapshot of the local stack state at any point in time. And you can perform various operations like restoring, merging, and injecting it back into your local stack container. Now, this feature is incredibly valuable for teamwork and collaborative development. Like, imagine you and your team who are working on different aspects of an application, each with their own IAM policies and configurations. With Cloud Pods, you can easily synchronize your development environment, all while simplifying like your debugging, testing, profiling processes, while ensuring consistency in your policies, while having a great degree of parity with the real cloud, which is AWS in this case. So in conclusion, you can use similar development workflows to automate the process of IAM management on your local developer machine by monitoring your policies for regulatory compliance and other permission violations. LocalStack's IAM in this case offer a solution that bridges the gap between local development and the live AWS environment. With Enforce IAM, soft mode, live policy streams, you can test and evaluate how your policies permit users and services to interact with your cloud resources and data, all while using technologies like CloudPod so that you can pre-seed your test environment or collaborate with your fellow developers and share the CloudPods just as a binary object. So that was all for the day. Thanks a lot for participating in this session, and I would be happy to take up any questions that you might have. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and GitHub by following my username Casper, and I would love to talk with you further about this particular topic. Thank you and have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Okay. Welcome back, and thank you, Harsh, for those testing strategies and dev tools. Now, is there a way to become as invulnerable as the Ring of Power? Well, Rafna Bash is founder of Activeto, with a focus on empowering women re-entering or transitioning into tech. Rafna's background as tech consultant has enabled her to assist startup founders, small businesses, and organizations better understand their technical requirements. Let's learn how to become as invulnerable as the Ring of Power by mastering access control in web applications.
Hello everyone, welcome to the session, Access Control in Web Applications. Before we start, a little bit about me. I'm Rafna Bash, CEO and founder of Activeto, an online community empowering women returning to tech careers after a break and those transitioning into the industry. I have more than 13 years of industry experience, worked with fintech, telecom, government, and nonprofit sectors. I'm working with startup founders, small businesses, and organizations as a consultant to help them understand their technical needs and develop a path forward. Today, I'm talking about various challenges with preventing unauthorized access to control access to your web application through authentication, session management, and authorization. Let's start with authentication. Passwords are the most common authentication method. Passwords are something that the user knows, so they are knowledge-based authentication factors. As a user, we are aware of ways to make passwords more secure, like do not use personal information, use tools like Password Manager, divide your accounts into trust levels and use different passwords for each level, etc. Websites like haveibeenpawned.com help you find out if your accounts are compromised. As a developer, the best way to store passwords securely is to use password hashing functions with a reasonable cost factor. Let's talk about the threats against an application's authentication system. First is a brute force attack. In a brute force attack, the attacker tries to guess the password of the application's valid user. It seems like a hopeless effort, but the chances are one of the users of an application uses such a weak password. So first strategy to prevent a brute force attack is to lock a user account after a certain number of authentication attempts. This is most common nowadays. A second strategy is to slow down authentication attempts after a pair of failures. For example, after 3 attempts, application waits for a second. After 4 attempts, it waits 3 seconds, etc. The attacker also needs a valid username to authenticate. That is where the enumeration attack comes in. With an enumeration attack, the attacker can determine if a user exists in the application. Username exists in the application. If the application leaks such information, then it can be abused to compile a list of valid usernames. That list, in turn, enables the attacker to optimize his brute force attack. The places where enumeration attacks often happen are in the login form, account recovery form, registration form. On a login form, for example, as you see in this slide, if an email like jane@example.com shows an error message like an unknown email address, and if an email like john@example.com gives an error message like invalid email address, then this application is leaking the information about the existence of a user named John. An account recovery form usually requests an email address. If it immediately notifies the user when the email address does not exist, like the one shown in the slide, again leaking the information about the existence of a username. When choosing a username or email address on a registration form like this, the application discloses if it already exists. So again, leaking the information of an existing username. To prevent enumeration attack, refrain from giving the user immediate feedback about the existence of an email address. The user gets the uniform failure message for existing and non-existing accounts in a login form as shown in the slide. If an email address exists on a recovery form, send the recovery email with the code or reset link. If it does not exist, send a message that informs the user about the potential account recovery. In cases where the application uses email address as a unique identifier on a registration form, if the email address is unknown to the application, create a new account and send an email to the user as shown in the slide. If the email address matches an existing account, send an email to remind the user of this account with instructions on how to recover the password. Password-based authentication has been in use for a long time. When the attacker learns the password, they can impersonate the user. So even with the modern best practices, the password is a weak authentication system. Another form of authentication is possession-based, which uses the possession of a physical device such as a phone or laptop for authentication purposes. User-inherent authentication uses biometrics like fingerprint, retina scan, etc. Behavior or context-based authentication includes properties like user behavior and location. All these forms of authentication are weak in isolation. They are strong when used in combination with passwords. This technique is multi-factor authentication. Most common example of multi-factor authentication we have seen using is the password with a mobile verification code combined. Another one I have seen with big applications is allowing the use of a USB security key. Implementing this multi-factor authentication requires a lot of effort. I think nowadays some of the applications have delegated authentication to third-party services like sign-in with Google to reduce the cost of effort needed. Delegating such authentication depends on the use of OAuth 2.0 or OpenID Connect. Securely implementing them also has challenges, but as an application provider, delegating authentication to a third party makes security implementation easier. Let's move on to session management. Server-side session management is the de facto standard. Authenticated state of a web application is stored in a session object on the server. Each session object is a unique identifier referred to as session identifier. In web application, interactions between a user and the application generally contain sensitive information like a password. Session management ensures these interactions are secure for authenticated users and that the information provided during their sessions is always safe. Failure to do this can lead to session management vulnerabilities. The most common strategy for secure session management is to store the session ID in a cookie. For example, when a user accesses an application to log in, this action creates a session object and assigns it in a session ID. The cookie stores the session ID and sends it to the browser as a response. When the user makes another request, the browser sends the cookie, which verifies the session ID and retrieves the object related to it. This means that the server can validate the user and maintain their sessions across different pages with different requests. The server sets the session cookie by sending the set cookie response header as shown in this slide. The header contains the name of the cookie and the session ID. Security of this session management mechanism depends on the secrecy of session ID. Session hijacking is one of the most critical threats against cookie-based session management. Hijacking occurs when an attacker compromises a session token by stealing or predicting it to gain unauthorized access to the server on behalf of its owner. If an attacker obtains the user's session ID, he can take control of the session, which means full access to the application in the name of the user. There are a few ways in which an attacker can achieve this. One is insecure generation of a session ID. If a session ID is predictable in some way, an attacker can calculate past and future IDs. This attack is known as brute forcing the session ID. Applications that use a custom algorithm to generate session ID are often vulnerable to this attack. The proper way to generate session ID is to use a secure random number generator. Another way is the insecure transmission or storage of the session ID. Sending the session ID in clear text over the network allows interception by an eavesdropper. A successful session fixation attack gives the attacker access to the victim's account, which means access to higher level privileges or the ability to look at the sensitive data. If the application uses HTTP, it exposes the session cookie on the network. The best practice today is to deploy your entire application over HTTPS, and to stop these session hijacking attacks, server can mark the session cookie as secure by attaching the secure flag to the set cookie header, which tells the browser that it should only be sent over HTTPS. You can see the set cookie header set to secure flag as marked in the green highlighter. If the application is using HTTPS in combination with a strict transport security policy, this attack would also not have been possible. Another potential attack vector is cross-site scripting, at stealing the cookie from JavaScript. A cross-site scripting vulnerability enables attackers to inject client-side scripts into web pages viewed by other users. When the attacker can control a piece of JavaScript running on a page of the application, he can abuse this to access the cookies. To prevent session hijacking from JavaScript, server can set another cookie flag, the HTTP only flag, to the set cookie header. You can see that on the red highlighted mark. It is a good idea to set the HTTP only flag on all cookies that do not need to be accessed from JavaScript. So in general, session cookies should always have both the secure and HTTP only flags enabled. This ensures that they will only be sent on HTTPS requests and cannot be accessed from JavaScript. The cookie-based session management is easier to handle when the application is smaller. But when you start deploying an application on a larger scale, things become a bit more complicated. For example, when an application is replicated on many servers, the first request goes to a particular server, and that server creates a session object and returns a session ID. But the second request now contains an ID that points to a session object generated by the first server. There are several strategies to tackle this problem. One way is use of sticky sessions, where all requests within a session go to the same server. Another way is sharing session state between servers. But there is also another way. The third way, most popular way, is client-side session management. In this new paradigm, session state is stored on the client instead of the server. This way, server no longer needs to keep track of session data. Let's look at how security is impacted with this approach. The most significant difference between two paradigms is the locality of the session object. One is stored on the server while the other is stored on the client. Session object stored on the server is considered trusted data because there is no way for the attacker to manipulate the contents of the object directly. However, with a session object stored on the client, the attacker can now change a session object before sending it to the server. Therefore, the data stored in the session object can no longer be trusted. Server should check the integrity of the session object before using any of its data. This integrity check is often implemented by adding a server-generated signature to the session object. Second difference is the level of control over active sessions. With server-side sessions, it is straightforward to consult a list of active sessions or to revoke a specific session. With client-side, there is no easy way to list active session because these sessions are only seen when the client makes a request. A final important difference to be aware of follows from the implementation of client-side session management mechanism. Many applications moved away from using cookies and use custom headers to transport the session object. While this avoids some of the security challenges with the cookies, it also complicates matters for the developer. Cookies are handled automatically by the browser while custom headers are not. So with custom headers, the developer needs to retrieve the session object from the server, store it somewhere, and attach to outgoing request. The choice made to implement these operations have certain ramifications for security. In general, client-side sessions have their own set of challenges and security trade-offs. Client-side sessions are often advocated because they push a part of load from the server to the client. In my opinion, client-side access control is useful for usability reason but not for security reason. Let's move on to authorization. One of the most important aspects of authorization in web application is deciding whether a request is legitimate. The same-side cookie flag indicates that a cookie should only be present on request within one site. To determine if a request falls within one site, the browser uses registered domain. From a distance, it does not look that hard to get authorization right, but the devil is in the details. One such detail is the use of insecure direct object references. For example, in the database shown, the data stored is assigned an ID, employee ID. This ID is used throughout the application to refer to this particular database. From the URL as shown below the database on the slide, it is requesting the employee data with ID 3. This makes it very likely that ID 1 to 3 exist as well. If the attacker modifies the parameter in the URL to fetch the other data, the application would simply return the data of the employees. This helps the attacker to retrieve all employee data and maybe more in the application. The most obvious solution to this problem is to put proper authorization checks in place. Another way of mitigating the problem is instead of exposing direct object references to the client, you can use indirect object references. Server keeps a map that relates these indirect object references to their counterparts. So in conclusion, preventing unauthorized access to web application is a complicated challenge. That is why many applications are vulnerable. Once you know about the problems, fixing them is not that hard. But unless you have heard about these issues before, defenses will likely be missing. To conclude, in web applications, preventing unauthorized access is about authentication, session management, and authorization. Getting a single detail wrong can escalate into a major vulnerability. So thank you for joining me today. To connect with me, email Rafna@Activator or scan QR code to connect me on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, Rafna. Next on the stage is Corey McCarty with a story about the power of the dev community. In addition to being a GitKraken ambassador, Corey is a backend developer turned full stack lead. He takes great pride in having redesigned a tool at his company that used to take nearly 10 minutes to load and now loads in a much more acceptable 1 second. Corey got into software development a little later in his career, and when asked what he feels was the key to his career move and growth, he does not hesitate to say his development community. Let's listen in as Corey shares his story.
Hello. It's my privilege to address you today as we delve into the world of community and collaboration in software development. My name is Corey McCarty, and I'm a GitKraken ambassador. I've been a developer for 9 years. With a bachelor's in computer engineering, I've had the opportunity to work with various technologies, primarily focusing on Java and Spring Boot, as well as JavaScript and Vue. Currently, I lead a team of 2 other developers. This responsibility has not only sharpened my technical skills, but has also deepened my understanding of the importance of cohesive collaboration. My journey has led me to a unique environment. A small yet impactful company consisting of 35 individuals dedicated to the continuing education of physical therapists and similar medical professionals. Within this organization, technology serves as a conduit for professional growth. And our success is rooted in the strength of our community. I feel privileged to be a part of this team that's been thriving for over a decade and offers solid job security. As we embark on this exploration of how community and collaboration enhance the work of software developers, let us remember that our personal stories, experiences, and knowledge come together to form a tapestry of progress that enriches us all. I'd like to share my story with you, along with what I've learned about collaboration and career advancement along the way. In my first job, I managed to fall into a support role for a number of years. This was tremendously underwhelming, but it taught me a lot about bash scripting, waterfall development, debugging, and web services in general. I had mistakenly believed at this time that the work assigned to me would naturally progress my career. And at this point, I was making an effort to interview for jobs at least every 6 months or so. It was in one such interview around my 3rd year in this position that I really messed up. I'd known very little about Spring Framework, only having been told that you don't mess with those XML files unless you know what you're doing. In this interview, you see the walls were whiteboard, and they were completely covered with notes from previous meetings. I made a mistake of asking about where the Spring Boot bits were and how they were using it. Of course, this led to them questioning me about what I know of Spring and how my team used it. I stumbled through some truly horrifying answers, and in hindsight, it surprised no one that I didn't get the job. So I went back and I talked with a trusted coworker and discussed some resources for learning Spring Framework and Spring Boot. You see, at this time, there had been a strong pre-existing culture of just keeping your head down and getting your work done when I came into this team. There were people that already knew that, and you didn't need to go and learn it. What this led to was that the more junior team members were isolated in just knowing bits and pieces of how things worked, and they were unable to do larger tasks without the senior developers. The siloing and gatekeeping of knowledge happens a lot of time when people believe in what's called the zero-sum game. They believe that there are only so many promotions and acknowledgments to go around, and they don't understand why they would help anyone else and make it harder for them to look superior. They'd rather cement their job security by being the only one that knows how to do things. Development, however, is not a zero-sum game. Rather than fearing the recognition of your colleagues' achievements will hinder your own progress, it's important to realize that mentorship and teamwork actually enhance your overall value. A competent manager is going to understand this and appreciate the collaborative spirit that leads to success in software development. In the end, when you empower others to do more things on their own, it frees you up to do more interesting things. So, after that terrible interview and speaking with my coworker, we realized that we'd both been having the exact same problem while looking for other positions. We worked together and found a really great resource to learn Spring. And after I spent some time learning everything that I could, I started feeling a lot more confident in my abilities as a developer. And I realized that this little bit of knowledge really helped me to understand the application that I was working on. Previously, it just seemed like there was some magical ether that made the whole thing work. This confidence made a really solid impact on my outlook and interactions at work. That trusted coworker and I began discussing our work, and effectively we started pair programming. I found myself talking with more and more people around me about whatever it is that they were learning. The more people that I interacted with in this way, the more helpful everyone around me seemed to be with one another as well. And after having talked with so many other people around me, I actually managed to get moved into another position where I'd be doing more active development. It was on this new team where I met some of my absolute favorite coworkers. We went through some training together to the ends of moving our application to the cloud. And a central part of this training was pair programming. And that really brought our group together. On this team, my leader actually started calling me Bash Guru because I was moderately proficient with command line and he just wasn't. He'd been developing for around 10 years longer than me, and I eventually convinced him to start mentoring me. He knew a great deal more than I did about application management, general development, while I knew more about Bash and build pipelines. Our group of developers on that team started building a culture of improvement and learning, and before the year was up, 2 of us would move on to other things. I still talk to that entire team to this day. You see, community, in particular for developers, is a huge catalyst. It brings learning that you just wouldn't likely pursue on your own. This is especially pronounced when you write code together. Pair or mob or group programming, whatever you call it, allows you to share techniques for debugging and the actual finding and writing of code. Because hotkeys and how to quickly find things in a large code base aren't exactly topics that would be covered in school, boot camp, or general development books. Feedback and code review are really important for learning to write better code. But when you do this in a group programming environment, there's much more room for learning and faster. Also, anytime that you're forced to talk about what you're doing in code using spoken language, it's really going to improve your soft skills. When you do this with non-developers, then you're further forced to abstract things in an even different way, and it really furthers your understanding of how something works. Einstein said that if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, then you don't understand it yourself. There's a lot of truth in that sentiment. Most of these things can be incorporated in your work, team, or community, but when your community extends beyond your company, then you can gain a lot more insight into what the industry as a whole is doing and what emerging trends are coming around. I personally started picking these things up when I joined an online community called Code Connector. And if you're looking for your own further community, I'd really recommend that one. Additionally, during this time, need arose for us to start working on our own CI/CD pipeline. And honestly, from what I knew about the applications that this team owned, I didn't want to work on those. It would be much more fun to play with a new pipeline than an old hierarchy storage system split across 16 projects. I spent the next 6 months working on Jenkins pipelines for all 16 of these applications. To me, it was an easy decision. It was new, and I was new, and didn't have the existing knowledge of our complex system. So, if you haven't heard it stated before, I'd just like to highlight that the most consistent thing in software development is that you will always need to be learning. Having examples of how you've done this in the past is something that hiring managers tend to really enjoy. I found a need that would benefit the team. I stepped up to learn the new thing from scratch. And this story has been a highlight of every interview I've been in since then. Every good tech manager knows that you'll need to learn on the fly to get things done. And demonstrating a way that you've done so will help them be much more apt to see you as a fit for their role. So, about now you've got to be asking, what should I be doing to bring this into my career? And I'm so glad you asked. The first step is that you have to find a community with other developers. One great way of doing that is by taking part in a conference like this one. There are also some really great communities around Twitter, Discord, and Slack, pretty much any social platform out there. Once you've found a community, you also have to engage in that community to really get the benefit. This may look like finding a mentor or offering to mentor others. Regardless, it should 100% involve open, curious discussion about different skills and tools. Sharing knowledge helps us to diversify our skills. I've found that blogging or creating some type of content to help others will also help you better understand things. Additionally, it's really beneficial to collaborate with others about their content that they've produced and ask whatever questions you might have on the topic. All in all, you really want to focus on building relationships within the community. You want to get to know people, you want to help them get to know you. That's what ultimately networking is all about. It has nothing to do with having a million connections on LinkedIn and asking them for references. These discussions also serve to help us determine what skills might be a good fit for our career. I personally keep a list of tech things that I've heard about. Periodically I go through and I read about them and I decide whether or not I need to move those into another list of things that I intend on learning at some point. Generally, just keeping in mind, learning and advancement while you're engaging in your community is something that's really important and helpful. All right, so throughout, none of this would be possible without community, learning, and a culture of collaborative advancement. So let's come together and embrace the power of mentorship, collaboration, and continuous learning. By working together, supporting and guiding one another, and always seeking new knowledge, we can not only achieve personal growth, but also help raise the tide and other developers with it. Thank you so much for your time. And if you'd like to connect with me, I can be found on Twitter at Corey D. McCarty, or you can join me on Code Connector's Slack community via codeconnector.io, or you can find the invite link on my Twitter bio. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Corey. Our next speaker may as well just be one of the 5 wizards from the Lord of the Rings. His name is Domagoj Vidovic, but most know him by his creator handle at TechWisdom. Dom is a senior developer turned tech content creator with over 650,000 followers across his channels. His mission is to help developers realize their content potential using their technical skills to captivate audiences. Let's take a page from this developer storyteller and learn about leveraging dev skills to do more than just write lines.
Hello everyone, Domagoj Vidovic here. I'm so glad to speak today at GitKon conference, and today I will be talking about coding beyond coding itself. So what can you do in tech space without pure writing lines of code? There is so many possibilities, and it's never been so cheap and easy to start a side hustle as today. And I'm also known as TechWisdom. My main platform is Instagram, but I'm also active on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, or X. And today, first I'm gonna start with my journey. As mentioned, TechWisdom, feel free to check it out. Then I'm gonna talk about different possibilities, what you can do. And finally, I'm going to share some of the lessons I've learned and how can you apply it to your journey too. Who am I? Well, I'm Tech Wisdom, as I mentioned too many times. At the moment, I have around 750k audience, and maybe you've seen me before. I'm that guy in that wizard suit who runs around and throws different tech jokes. And yeah, it was a journey to that point, and I want to share that journey. I started in August 2021, so 2 years ago, a bit more. Actually, it's not that bad considering how big the account has grown. And in August 2021, I opened TikTok and posted my first TikTok video, and I decided, okay, I will commit to post every single day. And I was doing that for basically a year and a half. So every single day for a year and a half. And yeah, this was TikTok. It started like this. Before, I was doing some different online businesses, trying out things. None of them especially worked, but yeah, I discovered social media, TikTok. I realized that tech niche is still quite not that saturated, that I can create better content. I believed in myself, and I started, and it was going well. And then I started to spread like a virus, and I decided I need to spread even more. In March 2022, I had around 50k on TikTok, and then I decided, okay, let's move to Instagram and YouTube. But honestly, numbers just weren't that good. Like nothing special was happening because I wasn't giving Instagram and YouTube too much attention. I just randomly posted, reposted already existing content from TikTok, and it's just like it didn't work that well because I was completely inconsistent and had so many other bad habits for those two networks, so nothing especially happened. As you can see, in July 2022, I had 200 followers on Instagram, so started in March, 4 months, 200 followers, not great results. But then I decided, okay, I'm gonna focus on Instagram now, and I'm gonna try to make it work on Instagram. So I started to create nice cover. I started to add captions, relevant hashtags, description, optimize my profile, because first I was trying to do weird things and just like create a completely new name and handle and avatar on Instagram, but it doesn't make sense. So yeah, just returned everything to my TikTok handle and TikTok avatar. And I also decided I will be consistent. I will post 2 times a day and engage, because I had a lot of content from TikTok, and basically it's the same thing. It's a short form video. So in September 2022, 500 followers, still nothing special, but the main thing that changes that I noticed that I'm just getting more views, people are engaging more, and just there was way more activity on Instagram. And then suddenly in September 2022, I posted one video which went viral. It got up to 5 million followers, 5 million views, something like that. I already posted that video 3-4 times before, but I was reposting good stuff because I knew it's good. It went well on TikTok, so I knew it's a good piece of content, and nobody watched it in the first place. So I was just like reposting videos. And in October 2022, I got to 100k followers. So that jump was from 500 to 100k in a single month. Of course, I took a screenshot, and I also took a screenshot of stats. As you can see in the beginning, I was gaining just a few followers per day. So this is like number of new followers per day. In the beginning, yeah, almost nothing, then a couple of tens, then a couple of hundreds, and then finally a couple of thousands new followers every single day. And I think top day was around 7k new followers. So yeah, it was a crazy period, and it completely changed my life because I started to earn some serious money from Instagram. And when I say serious, then I mean quite bigger than my salary at the time, and I was a senior developer in London, so that salary was already pretty good, but Instagram just started to make way more money. I made a deal which was almost as big as my monthly salary, and then I said, like, okay, I just need to go full time into content. There is no point in staying here. So I quit my job. I moved out of London because I lived in London at the time, and I became a digital nomad because I always wanted to become a digital nomad, just travel around the world, work and everything. And since then, yes, I'm traveling around the world with my gorgeous wife, jumping around in my wizard suit in all the locations, and like visiting all those nice beaches and places and hot working locations. And not saying that to brag, I just want to showcase you how life can change in such a short period of time. So just like 1 year before I launched my first TikTok video, and then suddenly I earn more than as a senior developer, and I can quit my job and I'm completely free, just creating content, going around the world, and it can change for you too. Because possibilities are endless. And social media is definitely not the only way. There is so much you can do in texting with, except, well, coding for other companies, because that's what many people do. But there's so much you can do. So I wanted to ask, like, do you mentor others? Well, because I've seen so many engineers mentoring. Their mentoring skills were just exceptional. I asked them something, and in a couple of minutes they broke down that complex topic, and it was just, wow, incredible. I immediately understood it. But the problem was that they just used those amazing skills for a couple of people in company. But why wouldn't they scale it? Why wouldn't they create content? Why wouldn't they build courses, write ebooks? Why wouldn't they mentor people, consult people, convert it into agency? There's just so much you can do. Courses, Fiverr, Upwork, WordPress plugins, Chrome extensions, mentoring, consulting. There's just so much you can do today. And it's never been easier to start a side hustle. It's never been so cheap to start a side hustle. So why not? I mean, the job market is pretty insecure. I actually quit my job in like that wild period of layoffs and crises and AI and everything. But we never know what will happen. And it's really good to have a side income, which can eventually become your main income. And yeah, I've said you don't need to have social media, but it definitely helps because you can launch anything. You already have the audience, so that marketing part is way easier than without audience. I'm not saying it's easy. I just said it's way easier, but it's still hard. For example, if you want to mentor other people, then if you also create content about the topic you mentor about, then you'll probably get some new clients to Instagram. Not probably, through socials. Not probably, but for sure you'll get new clients. So yeah, you don't need to do it, but it definitely helps. The same thing happened with me, although I started with social media, realized I loved it, I grew there, and then after I had my audience, I launched a coding course. Then I launched an online shop, and I also launched a content creator course because I noticed, well, people here are not only interested in me because I'm developer, because before I had a more developer-oriented content with like deep technical problems. But later I realized, people are actually interested in my content creation skills. So I just decided to create a course where I teach everything I know about content creation, social media, monetization, because yes, creating content is one thing, but earning good money with it is another thing. So yeah, basically build a course where I teach everything I know. And I plan to just continue building and launching new things, because in the same way one viral video changed my life, now one viral product can completely change my life and go completely viral and generate so much revenue. And you never know. You just need one good shot. And how to do it? Well, in this space of social media, you really need to do something you love. you need to create content about something you love, because too much creativity is involved, and if you don't like it, then you're just not gonna be that cute in that space. I don't know. It's just you need to love it, because you'll start hating it and you won't get that far. So find something you love, but also it would be ideal if that topic is at intersection of something that provides value to other people, because they will watch your content because of the value you provide. And know that value doesn't necessarily need to be something informative. If you take a look at movies people watch today or TV shows, they're usually entertainment. They're not documentary movies. Some of them are, but most of them people just watch for the entertainment. So entertainment is value, and you just need to give them a reason to watch you. Of course, you can share value, but you don't. Of course, you can share like information, but you don't need to. Value is an extremely broad term. You also need to be unique, because there are so many other people in the niche. Honestly, in tech, like the market is still really unsaturated. If you compare it to fitness, food, travel, you have crazy creative creators there, and they just have so amazing videos, and they always keep trying new things and everything. In tech, well, it's still not like that. It's gonna be, but it's still not like that. It's still so early. It was early when I was starting 2 years ago, but it's still early. So if you go there, you can definitely be unique, create unique content, and because of that, you will grow fast. Because if you push content which everybody else pushes, then, well, you don't give people a reason to follow. You don't give them enough reasons. So, of course, consume content that already established successful creators create, but add your twist to it. Like, there need to be something in that content. You need to give people reason to follow you. You also need to consistently improve, because content that might work today maybe won't work in 3 months. So you consistently need to change and improve all the areas like video quality, sound quality, editing, different scripts. You just want to consistently improve, because that's the only way for true growth. Just forget about numbers and just focus on good content that consistently improve. Because if that's the core, then yes, other things will come too. You also need to experiment, especially in the beginning, because you don't know what's good content, what's bad content. Sometimes you might think, oh, this is amazing, I'm gonna post this, it's gonna get viral. Nothing. And then on the other side, you think like, oh, this is boring, post it, it gets viral. So even me right now, after 2 years of consistent posting, I still sometimes, well, I'm surprised with results, because for some content, I just don't think it will go viral, and then it suddenly goes extremely viral, and of course the opposite happens. I'm extremely certain about some content, nothing happens, because in the end you need to build the algorithm too, and the state of algorithm which constantly changes. So it's not only about the content. So yeah, definitely experiment. If you think, should I post something or should not, just post it, because you never know what will happen. One video can truly, completely change your life. And finally, get some nice courses or mentors or both, because they're golden, they're cheat codes in your life. Why would you spend months trying out something and figuring something out where you could have just spent really not too much money and realize those things in a couple of hours? Because you can start completely alone, but then, well, you might just get demotivated because, well, you won't get the results. I didn't take any mentors or courses in the first couple of months, and because of that reason, I, for example, only posted on TikTok. I should have started with TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts immediately, because it's the same content. It's just one short form video which you create and post it on all 3 platforms. But I was doing only TikTok for 6 months because nobody advised me. So when you take mentors and when you take good courses, then you know everything you need to know immediately, and you jump like crazy. Like it's yeah, it's just a real cheat code. So highly recommend that. And yep, that would be all from me. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope I helped you. I hope I inspired you to start something, because as I've said, it's never been so easy to start a side hustle. That side hustle can become a main hustle, and you just need one shot to completely change your life. So it's never been so cheap. It's never been so easy. Try something, and feel free to drop me any questions you have on dom@techwisdom.com. Cheers.
All right, we're almost to the finish line, everyone. We have one final speaker to round us off here at GitKon 2023. By day, Théophane Hufschmitt is the lead of the Nix group at Twig Modus Create, and by night, he is a Nix OS Foundation board member. Théophane has been working as a consultant in functional program for the past few years before turning to build systems, the Nix and the Nix community. This is the final talk. Bring us home, Théophane.
Hello, GitKon. I'm glad to be talking to you today. I'm Théophane. I'm the lead of the Nix team at Twig.io, a software consultancy. And I'm also a member of the NixOS Foundation board and a Nix maintainer. And I'm here today to talk to you, and surprisingly, about Nix. And more precisely, how you can use Nix to keep your development environments in control. So I should start by explaining what Nix is, but we only have a short amount of time, not 10 days. So let's just consider for the purpose of this talk that Nix is a tool that you can use to manage your development environment. So all the dependencies you need, all the environment variables that you might need to build your project. And my take is that Nix is a great tool for that because of three properties that it has. The first one is that it's declarative. The second one, that it's absolutely generic. And the third one, that it's just correct enough as you need. So I'm going to quickly explain on these 3 points why I think they are important, why I think Nix has them. And then we're going to go to the fun part, get a bit hands-on, and use Nix to properly wrap a software project. So let's start with declarative. What does that mean, declarative? So as I said, I work for a software consultancy. This means that I get to see a lot of different clients, companies with different domains, different tech stacks, different problems. But there's one thing they all have in common. It's that README file which explains how to build a project, the first thing you read when you start working on the code base. And they are all variations on that, right? First step, clone the project. Second step, figure out how to install all the dependencies. And that makes me sad, but saddened. But the good news is we can do better. And Nix is one of the ways we can do better. So how does that work with Nix? Once your project is properly configured with Nix, you can just clone the project, run Nix shell, wait for it to fetch half of the internet that your project depends on, wait a bit more because fetching half of the internet can take some time, and then you get dropped into a new shell where all your dependencies are available. You can just run your build command. It's going to work. So I know what you might be thinking on, right? You might be thinking, hey, I know this tool, Nix is just a code name, and he's actually talking about NPM. And indeed, with NPM, you have your package.json, you just declare your dependencies here, and then NPM install, and you're good to go. But there's a limitation here, and NPM can be replaced by whatever your favorite package manager is, obviously. And that brings me to the second key point of Nix, the fact that it's generic. This is something that you're never going to see in a package.json. So OpenImageIO is an image manipulation library. And it's absolutely not a node package. And, well, you can kind of torture NPM, the NPM registry, to put a lot of things which are not really node packages there, but there are limits to that. And OpenImageIO, for example, is not in the NPM registry. And so that gets problematic if you have a package that depends on OpenImageIO, because then NPM is not going to install that for you. And you'll get back to the original problem of go figure out how to install the dependencies yourself. Now I know what you might be thinking. Hey, I know what this guy has been talking about all along. Nix is just a code name for Docker. Let me just have my Docker file in which I ran apt-get install lib open image.io, and I'm going to be good. Yes, that's true, but then that brings me to the third key property of Nix, which is the fact that it's just correct enough. So what does that mean? So Docker is inherently correct in that regard. You know, once you have your Docker image, which contains all your development tools, you can run it, and then you can have a really properly isolated environment. That's great for reproducibility. But then there's a problem. I'd like to run my editor in that environment because, I mean, it's useful, you know, to edit the code. But obviously, my editor is not installed in that environment. So now I get into troubles. There are solutions to that, fortunately, like dev containers, this great VS Code extension, which allows you to run half of the thing in your machine, half of the things in the container, get them to magically talk to each other. But it's a bit costly, and it makes the whole thing more complex. And the Nix solution is just that, well, as I said, Nix shell would drop you into a new shell, but that new shell is not an isolated container like Docker. It's really just a new shell with some extra environment variables and magic things to get your dependencies available in addition to what you already had on your machine. So now I can open my editor. It's still there. It's not going anywhere. And for the cases where I actually need the extra guarantees that of a clean environment, I can pass the --pure flag. And then the environment is fully clean before entering the shell. So I can be reasonably confident that the build environment I've defined is enough, which is great. So I hope I convinced you that Nix is a tool worthwhile trying for your development environment. And then let's go with me deep down the rabbit hole to see how we can actually use it. So we're gonna write some code, right? We're gonna write some Rust code for today. I don't know why. Rust is cool, isn't it? Okay, so let me just make sure that I have cargo and Rusty available, because otherwise we're gonna run into some troubles. And let's have some boilerplate. So cargo init will gently fill us with an initial source file. Just printing hello world is a bit boring, don't you find? Let's do something a bit funnier. We're gonna actually use this OpenImage.io library I mentioned earlier through the image2crate, which is a wrapper around that. So we have now this main file which will open an image in .jpg, convert it to grayscale, and then write the result as out.jpg. So we need to specify that it has a dependency on image2. I'm also going to cheat. We also need to pin a transitive dependency because the latest version doesn't work out of the box. And now we can cargo build. Oh, now we get a problem. The build failed. What is it saying? No such file or directory when trying to build image2. That doesn't sound good. So let's look at this build.rs file that has been failing. So it was like 18. What's happening? PKGs. What's PKG? PKG is defined as, oh, common new PKG config. Oh, I know what's going on. I'm in a fairly bare bone installation. I don't have PKG config. So I could install it on my machine, but we're here to use Nix, right? So let's create a shell.nix file, a file that Nix shell will use to see the environment that is declared. So let's start by importing Nix packages, the Nix package collection, which is the one that defines everything we're gonna need. We said we wanted to write a development shell, isn't it? And this development shell will depend on a bunch of things. So as we said, we're writing Rust code, so let's bring in Rusty and cargo. And as we saw, we need PKG config. And we can just straight away add OpenImage.io because we're going to need it since image is a wrapper around that. Okay, let's enter that Nix shell and see what's happening. So do we have pkg config now? Oh, yes. Oh, that looks good. Let's try and build. And it's a success. We can run our new GitKraken tool, which is going to fail because in.jpg doesn't exist, obviously. So let's fetch us a good, nice in.jpg. That's the NixOS logo, because which better image could you think of? And for the sake of visualizing, since I'm at a terminal on a remote machine, let me just bring in this incredible libcaca tool, which allows me to visualize images as ASCII art. So now we can see our in.jpg tool. That's the NixOS logo. It's pretty ugly. I mean, as it's shown, but it's here. We can recognize it. And let's run our GitKraken again, tool again. And now we have our new out.jpg thing. And what's, oh, out.jpg now is the NixOS logo again, but in gray. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, let's commit all that. And I'm going to do a quick and dirty commit, if you don't mind, because we're just here for the sake of the demonstration. Great, we have this code, it's working. Let's push it. I cheated, I already created the remote GitHub repo. All right, but now maybe it would be good to have a CI for that, right? Okay, we pushed on GitHub. Let's use GitHub Actions for the CI. And yeah, let's arguably the best way to get a CI to work. This is a REST project. Let's look at what the REST tells us. Modulo some small simplifications because there were some extras that we don't care about. This is what the REST book advises us to use. So simple CI config, we start with an Ubuntu image, we use REST-up, which is probably bundled in the image to get the REST toolchain, and then we cargo build, we cargo test, so we don't care about the test bit, we don't have test here. That's right. So let's commit that. Let's push, and let's wait for the CI to run, see what's going to happen. Okay, the CI should be done now. So what happened with our job? Oh, red cross. That doesn't sound good. Process completed with exit code 101. No, that's definitely not good. That's failure 101. So what if we look at the logs? So it starts building, all right, it builds, and oh, open image IO parameters.h missing. So our base Ubuntu image probably had pkg config because we didn't have the pkg config failure, but it apparently doesn't have open image IO. So we need to make it available in that image. Well, it's an Ubuntu image, right? We know how to install stuff on Ubuntu. Let's just apt get update, apt get install open image IO, and we'll be good. We will, but that will feel, it would feel dirty for me if I did that. I would feel very, very dirty. Why? Because now I have OpenImageIO declared here as a dependency, OpenImageIO declared here as a dependency. How? There's no way in Earth I'm going to be able to keep both in sync in the long run. Maybe they are already not in sync. Maybe the Ubuntu version and the Nix packages versions are different. Maybe they're built with different flags, which is going to make them behave slightly differently, just slightly enough that it doesn't go noticed at first, but then blows up at someone faces the layers below. So no, we don't want that. I said we want to keep these environments sane and in sync. So we want one source of truth. That's all right. We have our shell.nix as a source of truth. So we can just deal with that. And how can we just deal with that? Well, there's a simple way we can deal with that. Let's just use Nix on the CI. Let's start by installing Nix on the CI then. So fortunately, there's a great GitHub action which just does just that, install Nix on top of the default runners, and we'll also ask it to set the Nix path so that Nix packages knows what it should resolve to. And once we have that, all we have to do is run all that in a Nix shell. And we can even get rid of the rest step, right? Because now Nix is already providing a workers with cargo. So let's commit that. And let's push. And let's just wait for the CI to be done running. Okay, the CI should be good now. Let's look at what it's telling us. And oh, it's green, it's green, it's green. Oh, that's good. Let's look at the logs, see what has happened. So, okay, the runner is initializing, it's cloning the thing. Oh, we're installing Nix. Oh, that's good, that's good, that's good. Okay, so the Nix installation leaves a lot of logs because that's funny. And then what happens? Oh, Nix shell, command cargo build. That's good. That's exactly what we wanted. That's what we run locally. That's what we should run on the CI. And here we can see Nix fetching this half of the internet I mentioned. That's a small half because that's a small project. But you can see that Nix is really trying to be correct, as I said, fetching everything, the 2 bin utils or GCC. And all the way up to Rusty and libimage.io. And now inside this Nix shell, we run cargo build. And yeah, libimage.io just builds properly because we have everything, builds properly because we have this libimage.io dependency. And now we're happy. We have our CI and our local developments exactly in sync using the exact same environment. And that's one less concern for us.
So now there's a lot of directions we could go from there because, as I said at the beginning, Nix is a galaxy of things and you can always push it further to solve more needs that you might have. But that's going to be a story for another day because my time's already up. I just hope that this gives you a taste of what you could do and how Nix can solve your problems. And don't hesitate to reach out to me if you want to know more or if you have any question or suggestion about that. Thank you.
And we did it. Let's give a virtual hand to Théophane for closing out our session lineup and for closing up what has been a truly legendary GitKon. We have reached the end of the conference and we are so grateful to each of you, our viewers, for joining us. I want to take a moment to thank each of our speakers for their insightful contributions to this virtual conference. A special thank you to Dharmesh Shah, Justin Cormack, and of course, Shah and Astin. To each and all of our speakers, we could not have done this without you. And we thank you so, so much for giving back to our shared community. This has been a huge effort. There is a monumental amount of work and preparation that happens behind the scenes to bring this conference to life. So this is the credits here. A shout out to Dave Bohr, Alex Brazda, and Diane Lowe from the GitKraken marketing team for leading the GitKon charge. Another shout out to Manning Fisher for producing the GitKon art that you see not only behind me, but all throughout the website and conference content as well. An additional thank you to Kyle Rector, Allison Wheeler, Sarah Stamus. Thank you so much for your critical supporting efforts. And a major thank you to Melise Michael for producing this monster content stream that you've been watching and for the beautiful visuals that you've been enjoying throughout the conference. Shout out to other GitKraken team members who participated in and supported the creation of several GitKon sessions that we just saw. And a final thank you to our GitKraken leadership team, especially our CEO, Matt Johnston, for their support. My name is Jonathan Silva, and it's been a pleasure to serve as your host. See you next time and stay legendary.